Bears are powerful, unpredictable, and capable of turning any calm moment into chaos. From hikers swept into the icy plunge pools of Sakhalin Island to a Kodiak hunter trapped inside his cabin, these encounters reveal the terrifying split seconds when survival hangs by a thread. In this video, we'll dive into 6 true stories where humans came face to face with nature's most formidable predator, and not everyone made it out alive. On November 1st, 2025, the chill of late autumn hung heavily over Sakhalin Island, where the dense forests and jagged cliffs seemed to swallow all sound except the distant roar of waterfalls cascading into icy pools below. 4 hikers adventured deep into this remote wilderness, seeking the secluded falls famed among local guides for their wild beauty and the salmon that churned the waters during late fall runs. Anastasia Ivanova, 27, moved cautiously over slick moss and fallen leaves, her camera swinging from her neck as she scanned the misty clearing for the perfect photograph. Her friends, Dmitry Sokolov, 32, a sturdy man with a sharp eye for terrain; Olga Morozova, 29, agile and confident in the forest; and Andrei Kuznetsov, 35, quiet but steady, followed closely behind, their packs heavy with climbing gear, extra layers, and thermoses of steaming tea. They had planned this trip for months, aware that Sakhalin's grizzlies were active in the fall, but they believed that careful observation, cautious movement, and avoidance of direct salmon pools would keep them safe. The group arrived at the base of the waterfall, just as the late afternoon light struck the falling water in golden streaks, illuminating a pool crowded with leaping salmon. They paused to photograph the scene, each movement measured and soft, aware of the potential presence of wildlife. Anastasia crouched near a log jutting over the bank, framing the water through her lens, while Dmitry scanned the tree line for any sudden movement, his fingers tightening on the straps of his backpack. Olga knelt on a rock at the edge of the pool, her boots splashing lightly in shallow water, and Andrei leaned over to point out a particularly large salmon darting upstream. The moment felt serene, almost sacred. But beneath that stillness, the air carried the heavy musk of a nearby male Russian grizzly, a prime adult drawn to the concentrated salmon that signaled an easy late-season meal. Without warning, a massive shape erupted from the underbrush 50 meters above the pool, moving with astonishing speed and silent menace until it lunged into view. A Russian grizzly, its dark brown coat streaked with frost, muscles rippling as it barreled toward the group. The hikers froze in disbelief, their instincts screaming that flight was impossible against such a predator in its territory. The bear's massive head swiveled, eyes fixed on the nearest movement, and in that instant, panic replaced reason. Anastasia dove behind a fallen log, heart hammering as the world seemed to tilt into chaos. She watched in horror as Dmitry, Olga, and Andrei scrambled up the wet rocks. Still, the bear struck with terrifying precision, swiping, snapping, and pushing, its weight sending them tumbling into the icy plunge pool below. The waterfall's current instantly claimed them, the frigid water slamming against their bodies as they were swept over jagged rocks, hitting protrusions that tore clothing and skin alike. Anastasia's breath caught as she saw Andrei's pack float briefly before sinking under the froth. Olga's scarf caught on a submerged branch, and Dmitry's leg struck a boulder in a spray of white water. She wanted to run, to leap in, to do anything to help, but the raw force of the bear's presence froze her to the spot, leaving her trapped behind the log with nothing but wide, terrified eyes to track the unfolding horror. The bear roared, a deep guttural sound that echoed against the cliffs, and then, with astonishing deliberation, returned to its salmon-rich pool, sniffing, pawing, and securing its feeding ground as though the chaos it caused was merely incidental. Minutes later, Anastasia staggered from her hiding place, trembling uncontrollably, the sound of the rushing water still ringing in her ears. She moved carefully, half running, half sliding, toward a path she hoped led back to the trailhead, leaving behind the frantic, life-shattering scene she could not yet process. By the time she reached safety, dusk had fallen over the forest, and the temperature had dropped sharply, each breath forming clouds that mixed with her sobs. She contacted local rangers immediately, giving them a detailed account of the attack, including the location of the waterfall, the approximate size and condition of the grizzly, and the sequence of events that had cost her friends their lives. Authorities later recovered the hikers' bodies downstream, amid torn backpacks, scattered gear, and the broken serenity of the pool. The official report noted that the grizzly was in prime condition, heavily muscled, and intensely food-focused, likely defending the salmon that sustained it through the harsh winter ahead. Rangers praised Anastasia's composure under terror, her ability to give precise directions that allowed them to locate and document the site quickly, and her first-hand account painted a chilling picture of how even experienced, careful hikers could encounter catastrophic danger in concentrated predator feeding zones. The forest, which had moments before seemed so inviting and picturesque, had revealed its unforgiving reality in the most violent of ways. Anastasia later reflected on the attack, describing how quickly peace could collapse into horror, how instinct and survival sometimes demanded impossible decisions, and how the ferocity of a wild animal defending its sustenance could overwhelm human skill and preparation. Even seasoned adventurers like Dmitri, Olga, and Andrei, who had studied animal behavior, understood terrain, and moved cautiously in the wilderness, were not immune to the lethal focus of a grizzly in late fall. The experience left a scar beyond the physical, a deep awareness that the raw power of nature, particularly in places like Sakhalin Island, where apex predators thrived, was utterly indifferent to human presence. By the end of November 1st, the waterfall was no longer a tranquil haven. Instead, it had become a memorial to 3 lives cut short, a tragic reminder of the thin line between adventure and mortality, and a testament to the terrifying reality that even the most careful preparation could falter against the unpredictable might of one of Russia's largest predators. On August 12, 2025, the late morning sun glinted off the metal fences and glass viewing panels of a Bavarian wildlife park, warming the concrete pathways and casting long shadows across the enclosures, where animals roamed under the careful supervision of their human caretakers. Johann Becker, 36, a veteran zookeeper with over a decade of experience working with large carnivores, moved briskly down the pathway toward the brown bear enclosure, a thermos of coffee swinging from his belt and his clipboard tucked under his arm as he checked the day's feeding schedule. He was methodical in his movements, aware that even small errors in timing or placement could alter an animal's behavior, especially in late summer when the bear's energy levels were high and their focus increasingly drawn to food and enrichment items designed to mimic natural foraging. Earlier that morning, a minor logistical mistake had occurred. A staff member, distracted by a delivery of fresh meat from the park's cold storage, had inadvertently left a gate partially open while moving supplies back into the storage area, leaving a subtle but crucial gap between the enclosure's main feeding zone and the path where caretakers usually placed enrichment. Becker, unaware of the oversight, approached the enclosure with a set of puzzle feeders and fresh vegetables intended to stimulate the bear's instincts. The bear, a fully grown male weighing over 250 kilograms with thick brown fur and sharp glinting claws, immediately noticed the improperly positioned meat that had fallen outside its intended feeding area. Its nose twitched, and a low, resonant growl vibrated through the air as it processed the unexpected arrangement. Becker reached the fence, leaning over carefully to secure the enrichment items in the designated area, when the bear lunged with shocking speed, propelled by instinct, hunger, and the perception of intrusion into its territory. Johann barely had time to react as the massive animal slammed him against the reinforced metal fence, the force sending shockwaves up his arms and back, and the sound of crunching metal and splintering wood reverberated through the nearby pathways. The bear's claws tore through the thick canvas of his gloves and sleeves, leaving deep, burning lacerations across his forearms, shoulders, and torso. He toppled backward as a metal cart carrying additional enrichment items was knocked over, scattering fruit, meat, and puzzle pieces in all directions as the bear advanced, snarling and swiping with frightening precision. Park staff, alerted by the sudden commotion and the roar of the bear, responded immediately, deploying high-pressure water hoses in a coordinated effort to create a barrier between Johann and the enraged animal. Emergency alarms blared, echoing through the park and startling the bear, forcing it to retreat a few steps, but not before Johann was slammed once more against the fence, his body racked with pain, bruises forming instantly under the impact, and blood mixing with sweat as he struggled to maintain consciousness. He could feel every pulse of the animal's immense strength as it pressed against him, a reminder of the raw power that even captivity could not diminish. Colleagues worked frantically to ensure the bear's attention remained on the water jets and alarms, moving carefully yet decisively to lure it back toward the deeper enclosure where the animal could be safely contained. Johann, meanwhile, attempted to rise, each movement sending sharp pain radiating through his arms and back, but the immediate priority was survival and securing the bear's retreat. His training took over as he kept himself low, avoided sudden movements that could reignite the bear's focus, and allowed the staff to guide the animal back behind the reinforced gates. Only once the bear was safely contained could he collapse fully, gasping for air, vision blurred, skin torn and bruised, every nerve ending alive with pain and adrenaline. Emergency medical services arrived within minutes, stabilizing Johann on the scene before an air ambulance transported him to a regional hospital, where surgeons worked to repair the deep lacerations, address the extensive bruising, and treat the shock that had gripped him during the attack. Doctors later reported that, despite the severity of his injuries, his swift survival instincts and years of experience with large carnivores had prevented what could easily have become a fatal incident, emphasizing that even seasoned professionals could find themselves at the mercy of a powerful, determined bear under circumstances amplified by human error. Park authorities conducted a thorough investigation, identifying the combination of the partially open gate, the placement of the enrichment items outside the intended feeding zone, and minor vulnerabilities in the enclosure's design as contributing factors to the attack. Their report noted that while the bear had acted in accordance with its instincts, asserting dominance, protecting resources, and responding to perceived threats, the incident also highlighted how small lapses in procedure could rapidly escalate into life-threatening situations, even in controlled environments. Colleagues and witnesses described the scene as chaotic and terrifying, a reminder that animals of this size, strength, and intelligence demanded respect, constant attention, and strict adherence to safety protocols. Johann later reflected on the attack, recalling the moments of brutal clarity as the bear struck, the disorientation from the force and the pain, and the rush of adrenaline that had both saved and tortured him. He thought about the unpredictability of working with apex predators, even in captivity, and how easily a routine task could transform into a deadly encounter if even the most minute details were overlooked. The experience left a profound impression on him and his fellow staff, reinforcing a culture of vigilance, humility, and respect toward animals that, while trained and monitored, were always fundamentally wild at heart. By the end of August 12th, the bear enclosure had returned to a tense calm, the animal resuming its patrol of the territory with an indifferent grace, oblivious to the chaos it had wrought, while Johann's recovery began under careful supervision, a living testament to the thin margin between human control and the uncontrollable strength of one of nature's largest terrestrial predators. On October 14, 2023, the crisp autumn wind swept across Kodiak Island, carrying the scent of salt, pine, and the lingering musk of wildlife preparing for winter. As Ethan Walker, 42, settled into the solitude of his remote hunting cabin, unaware of the peril approaching with terrifying inevitability. Ethan was a seasoned hunter, familiar with the rhythms of the island's forests and streams. He had spent weeks tracking late-season deer through dense alder thickets and over rugged ridges, relying on his well-maintained rifles, keen observation skills, and years of wilderness experience to bring in his game. The cabin, a modest timber structure tucked into a sheltered clearing far from any maintained trail, contained the spoils of his labor. Freshly harvested venison hung from hooks near the cooking area, deer carcasses stored on tables, and game meat wrapped in heavy-duty plastic, stacked neatly against walls for processing. The air was thick with the rich aroma of cured meat and the faint tang of blood, a siren to any predator sensitive to scent, including the massive Kodiak bears that roamed the island's untamed wilderness. Late that night, long after Ethan had extinguished the small stove and settled into a worn chair near the hearth, a shadow passed silently across the window, momentarily catching his eye. But it was only a flicker, almost imperceptible against the dark silhouette of the forest beyond, and he returned to preparing his gear for the next day. Outside, a male Kodiak bear, unusually large even for the island standards, had picked up the strong scent of fresh game and moved with deliberate predatory intelligence through the moonlit underbrush, each step calculated to avoid snapping twigs and alerting humans to its presence. The bear approached the cabin, nose twitching, muscles coiled beneath a thick golden-brown coat, claws extended slightly as it tested the air for signs of vulnerability. A partially secured door, loosened by Ethan earlier that evening to allow for ventilation, presented a small but exploitable weakness, and the bear, sensing opportunity, pressed its massive shoulder against the timber frame, testing the resistance. With a sudden, bone-jarring shove, the door splintered, shards of wood flying across the floor as the bear forced entry, its immense bulk filling the cabin doorway and casting a moving shadow across Ethan's belongings. The hunter barely had time to react, his heart hammering and adrenaline surging as the bear advanced, growling deeply, its eyes fixed on the hung meat and the movement of a human within its perceived territory. Ethan grabbed a nearby chair, swinging it with all his strength in a desperate attempt to create distance, but the bear's speed and weight made any defense almost futile. The animal swiped with a powerful forelimb, tearing through the chair, sending splinters across the floor, and slamming Ethan against the rough timber wall with a force that knocked the air from his lungs. The cabin descended into chaos. Hunting gear, rifles, and backpacks were hurled aside or trampled, windows shattered by the bear's thrashing, and the scent of blood mingled with the raw tang of fear and meat. Ethan attempted to shield himself, his arms raised, but the bear's claws raked across his shoulders and torso, leaving deep defensive wounds that testified to his struggle. He stumbled, struck again, and fell near the cooking area, partially covered by debris, bruised and bleeding heavily, his body pinned by the sheer mass and strength of the animal. Outside, the wind carried muffled thuds and the occasional crash, but the remote location made it impossible for neighbors to approach safely. They would later report hearing the terrifying sounds echoing through the night. Their source only confirmed hours later when authorities arrived. When wildlife officials finally reached the cabin at first light, they found a scene of devastation. Furniture lay in splinters, hunting equipment was shredded, and torn plastic from stored game littered the floor. Deep claw marks streaked the walls and door frames, tracing the path of the bear's fury as it reacted to the confined space, scavenging the scent of meat and asserting its presence with overwhelming power. Ethan's body was discovered slumped near the cooking area, partially obscured by the debris, with defensive injuries clearly visible on his arms and shoulders. His survival instincts had kept him fighting as long as possible, but the overwhelming strength of a Kodiak bear in a small enclosed space left him little chance. The animal, startled and agitated by human movement, eventually retreated, leaving behind the destruction and the tragic outcome of one hunter's fatal miscalculation. Authorities described the bear as an unusually large male, likely scavenging and responding aggressively to being confined in a space where its instincts were heightened by the smell of game and the sudden presence of a human. The incident underscored the extreme dangers hunters face on Kodiak Island, where apex predators roam freely and can be drawn into conflicts by food odors or unsecured structures. Wildlife officials emphasized the importance of strict protocols for food and game storage, particularly in cabins and other enclosed spaces, warning that even the most experienced hunters could be caught off guard by a predator acting purely on instinct. Ethan's death became a sobering reminder of the raw power and unpredictability of Kodiak bears, whose immense size, strength, and hunger can transform a familiar hunting environment into a lethal trap in mere seconds. Neighbors and fellow hunters who knew Ethan spoke of his careful preparation, his respect for wildlife, and his experience navigating the island's rugged terrain, emphasizing that his death was not due to recklessness, but rather to the unforgiving nature of the wilderness itself, where apex predators, driven by instinct and opportunity, could turn a cabin, normally a sanctuary, into a site of unimaginable violence. The shattered remains of the cabin, the streaked walls, and the overturned furniture stood as grim testimony to the event, a silent memorial to a hunter whose final moments were defined by courage, struggle, and the merciless reality of living alongside some of the planet's most formidable predators. By the end of October 14, 2023, the wilderness around the cabin returned to quiet normalcy, the wind drifting through the trees and carrying with it only the faint traces of the previous night's terror, a stark reminder that even the most prepared and experienced individuals could not fully control the forces of nature on Kodiak Island. On February 22, 2018, the bitter wind cut across the frozen harbor of a small, isolated village in northern Norway, carrying the scent of snow, ice, and the lingering aroma of stored fish and livestock that had been prepared for the long polar winter, while residents huddled inside their homes, unaware that a massive predator was approaching with the potential to turn a quiet morning into chaos. The animal, a full-grown male polar bear with a thick, matted coat tinged with frost and mud, had wandered miles across the tundra, driven by hunger intensified by an unusually severe winter that had limited its access to natural prey. Its black eyes scanned the village with instinctive calculation, each step silent against the snow until the moment it reached the harbor's frozen surface, where crates of salted fish and small sheds containing chickens and goats offered irresistible temptation. The bear tested the structures with its enormous paws, tearing into the wood and scattering fish and debris across the ice, while the air filled with the low, guttural growls that reverberated across the stillness, a warning to any who might approach. Villagers were the first to notice the disruption. Families peered cautiously from frost-lined windows, children clinging to parents as the bear moved closer to residential areas, knocking over crates, leaving deep claw marks in the ice, and occasionally spinning to glance at movement in the distance. Panic rippled through the community as some fled to the safety of locked houses, while others attempted to secure their livestock in sheds and pens. However, the bear's size and determination made much of their effort futile. A sudden crash as the animal overturned a storage shed sent hearts racing, the sound echoing across the frozen landscape, and it became immediately clear that ordinary measures would not contain such a powerful intruder. Local hunters, experienced in the unpredictable behavior of Arctic wildlife, quickly organized a response. Eric Johansson, 42, a veteran tracker familiar with both the terrain and the habits of polar bears, took command, directing colleagues to mount snowmobiles, arm themselves with flare guns, and spread out strategically along roads and open spaces. Each hunter understood that the priority was not to harm the bear unnecessarily, but to prevent it from reaching densely populated areas while keeping themselves and civilians safe. They coordinated in silence and small bursts of shouted instructions, moving in formations designed to funnel the bear toward the open tundra, where it could be encouraged to retreat. The standoff was tense from the beginning. The polar bear, sensing the encroaching human presence, swiveled its massive head, sniffed the air, and let out a deep roar that seemed to shake the ice beneath its feet, demonstrating both frustration and territorial awareness. When one hunter drove a snowmobile too close, the bear swiped with a forepaw, striking the metal and lightly injuring him on the shoulder before retreating to reassess the situation, leaving him shaken but alive. Flare guns fired in arcs of red and green light, startling the bear, which paused, ears flicking, nose twitching, and massive paws scraping furrows into the snow. Each maneuver required careful timing, as a single mistake could provoke an aggressive charge toward hunters or village structures. Over several hours, the hunters worked methodically, alternating between loud noise, bursts of light from flares, and the strategic presence of snowmobiles to prevent the bear from doubling back into the village. It moved with surprising agility and awareness, circling obstacles and sniffing the air for the faintest trace of food or human scent, its sheer size and strength evident in every step that crushed ice and snow beneath its feet. The villagers watched from a distance, gripping windowsills and each other, as the drama unfolded in slow-motion terror, understanding that the predator's instinct was indifferent to human fear, and that any misstep could have resulted in serious injury or death. Finally, after hours of careful maneuvering, the polar bear was coaxed back toward uninhabited tundra, retreating across the snow with occasional pauses to glance back at the human figures that had constrained it. The hunters maintained a distance, keeping flares lit and engines running to ensure the bear did not double back while giving it space to escape without confrontation. Once it disappeared over a distant ridge, leaving the village silent once more except for the crackle of frozen snow and the wind through bare timber, the immediate danger had passed. Hunters assessed themselves for injuries, checked that all livestock was accounted for, and worked with villagers to secure any remaining food sources to prevent a repeat intrusion. Authorities later noted that polar bears occasionally enter villages during extreme periods of food scarcity, particularly when harsh winters reduce their access to seals and other natural prey, forcing them to approach human settlements in search of alternative sustenance. The incident was cited as an example of a rapid, coordinated response between experienced locals and hunters, preventing a potentially fatal outcome. Observers highlighted the professionalism and calm decision-making of Eric Johansson and his team, whose understanding of the bear's behavior, coupled with knowledge of the terrain and improvisation under pressure, kept residents safe and minimized the risk of severe injury or loss of life. In time, the village returned to an uneasy quiet, snow crunching under cautious footsteps, and windows cautiously reopened as families reflected on their narrow escape. The frozen harbor bore the marks of the bear's intrusion. Clawed crates, scattered fish, and flattened snow where the predator had circled, a visible testament to the raw power and unpredictability of Arctic wildlife. The polar bear had returned to the vast wilderness, its hunger temporarily sated or redirected, leaving behind a community profoundly aware of the fine line between coexistence and catastrophe in extreme northern environments, and a reminder that even a single predator, driven by survival instinct, could challenge human control in an instant. On April 11th, 2022, the morning fog hung low over the forested hills near Prince George, British Columbia, muting the roar of machinery and lending an eerie calm to the logging site as the crew prepared for another day of clearing timber, unaware that the day would end in tragedy. The forest, dense with towering conifers and thick underbrush, had long been home to grizzly bears. However, industrial operations had pressed relentlessly into previously untouched areas, bringing humans into dangerous proximity with wildlife. Foreman Jack Rollins, 41, a man known for his strict deadlines and confidence in machinery over caution, oversaw the team with a brisk efficiency, ignoring warnings from several experienced loggers who had spotted fresh tracks near the clearing and urged a pause. The tracks were unmistakable. Deep claw impressions pressed into the damp earth, signs that a bear, likely a sow with cubs, was active nearby. Yet Rollins waved them off, insisting that operations continue. The crew moved heavy equipment forward, chainsaws revving and bulldozers grinding against the spring-thawed soil. At the same time, Caleb Ross, 29, a meticulous logger with a reputation for careful observation, paused at the edge of the clearing, noting the subtle disturbance in the hillside, the scent of damp fir, and the faint impression of a den beneath the roots of a toppled tree. His unease was shared silently with one or two colleagues, but the foreman's orders were absolute. Clear the site, fell the timber, and maintain the schedule. By mid-morning, a portion of the hillside, loosened by the heavy machinery and vibrations of industrial work, collapsed with a low rumble, sending soil, roots, and fallen logs sliding toward the base of the slope. That was the moment the grizzly sow, roused and enraged, emerged from the den with astonishing speed and precision, barreling directly toward the closest human target. Caleb, caught off guard despite his instincts, had barely a second to react. The bear struck him with tremendous force, slamming him against the machinery and tearing through protective clothing with claws designed to grasp and rend. The sound of crushing metal, snapping timber, and a guttural roar filled the clearing as other crew members froze momentarily, horror overtaking instinct, before scrambling to respond. Bulldozer engines roared, chainsaws revved, and air horns blared as colleagues attempted to create noise and distance, trying to drive the bear away without provoking it further. The sow's focus, however, was unyielding, directed entirely at protecting her den and cubs, her every movement calculated to eliminate the perceived threat. Caleb was thrown to the ground amid the chaos, his body battered and bleeding, his arms and shoulders bearing defensive wounds from swipes meant to repel him, and his colleagues' frantic efforts could not prevent the fatal injuries that the bear inflicted before retreating briefly at the cacophony of machinery and human shouts. The rest of the crew managed to maintain a safe perimeter, keeping the engines running and the noise constant, forcing the sow back into the forest. Yet the damage had already been done. Emergency responders arrived minutes later, but despite rapid triage and attempts at stabilization, Caleb's injuries proved too severe to survive, leaving a profound sense of shock and grief in the camp. Wildlife officers later conducted an investigation, confirming that the logging operation had violated seasonal restrictions designed to protect denning bears, including sows with dependent cubs. The collapse of the hillside, combined with continued human intrusion, directly triggered the sow's defensive aggression, a scenario that could have been avoided if proper protocols had been followed. Public outrage followed, focusing on the failure to respect the natural rhythms of wildlife and the preventable death of a dedicated logger. Fines were levied against the company, operations were suspended, and Rollins resigned in the wake of the incident, acknowledging both legal and moral responsibility for disregarding crew warnings and the presence of wildlife. Months later, Rollins returned privately to the site, carrying a simple wooden cross, which he placed at the edge of the clearing where Caleb had fallen. The cross, weathered by wind and snow, became an unspoken memorial, a tangible reminder of the intersection between human industry and the fragile refuge that wild creatures required for their survival. Crew members, residents, and local authorities reflected on the incident not only as a personal tragedy, but also as a symbol of the growing conflict between economic activity and environmental stewardship, particularly in regions where apex predators, such as grizzlies, were forced into ever-shrinking habitats. By the end of April 11th, 2022, the forest surrounding the clearing had fallen into an uneasy quiet. The hum of machinery had been replaced by the whisper of wind through the trees, and the distant call of wildlife resumed its cautious routines. The site bore visible marks of the encounter: clawed soil, splintered timber, and the flattened underbrush where the sow had defended her cubs. Caleb Ross's death remained a sobering reminder of the lethal consequences of underestimating nature, ignoring warnings, and prioritizing production over caution. The story circulated widely in logging and wildlife circles as a case study in safety, ethics, and the delicate balance between human ambition and the instinctive defense of the natural world. Even as spring advanced, the den remained intact, and the sow and her cubs were observed cautiously from a distance, surviving in the shadow of human encroachment, a living testament to resilience, vigilance, and the primal imperative to protect one's young, no matter the cost. On October 9, 2025, the night air over a remote gas station in Ussuri Krai was thick with fog, carrying the sharp scent of diesel, pine, and an unexpected aroma that drew a massive predator far from its usual forested habitat, transforming what had been a quiet, routine shift into a confrontation that tested every instinct of the humans involved. Dmitry Ivanov, 39, and Sergei Petrov, 42, worked the late shift inside the convenience store, methodically checking inventory, logging sales, and occasionally glancing through the fogged windows at the dark expanse beyond the pumps, unaware that a creature of extraordinary size and strength was approaching with singular purpose. Earlier that evening, a late-night fuel delivery had left several crates of canned food stacked haphazardly near the pumps, a temporary arrangement intended to expedite unloading. Yet in the context of Ussuri Krai's increasingly scarce food environment, it became a lethal temptation. Without warning, a colossal Russian grizzly, a male in prime condition with thick matted fur streaked with mud and frost, emerged from the shadowed tree line, moving silently through the darkness until it reached the edge of the asphalt lot, then charging with a speed and precision that belied its massive bulk, smashing through the automatic doors with a thunderous crash that sent glass, metal, and debris flying. The bear's massive paws tore through the store's front panels and splintered wood, scattering crates, signage, and stacked inventory across the floor. At the same time, the roar that followed echoed through the fog, reverberating off the surrounding trees and sending shivers through both attendants. Dmitry and Sergei froze for a heartbeat, hearts hammering, their eyes tracking the hulking shape that now dominated the small building, realizing instantly that any sudden movement could provoke a direct attack, but remaining motionless was equally dangerous as the bear sniffed, swiped, and circled in search of the stacked food. Reacting with trained urgency, the attendants pressed themselves behind counters, barricading doors and shelves to create a makeshift barrier while simultaneously activating emergency flares. The red sparks illuminated the bear's immense form, casting flickering shadows across shattered windows and scattered cans. The grizzly swiped repeatedly at a metal cart, tearing it apart with brutal efficiency, and raked its claws across crates of food, sending them tumbling like bowling pins across the concrete. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and terrifyingly strong, a reminder that even in captivity or in proximity to humans, apex predators retained the full scope of their raw power. The attendants' fear was palpable, their breathing shallow and rapid as they watched the bear pivot, swat, and stamp its massive feet, each movement leaving deep gouges in the asphalt and concrete beneath. Outside, the night remained eerily still, punctuated only by the roar of engines from parked vehicles, the shouts of the attendants, and the occasional metallic clang as the bear interacted with its environment. It was clear that the animal's focus was on food rather than human bodies, yet its presence and sheer size made any misstep potentially fatal. For nearly 10 minutes, the bear prowled, swiping, tossing debris, and investigating every potential source of sustenance with meticulous care, each paw leaving a visible imprint in the dust and mud that had settled over the lot during the week. Dmitry and Sergei, hearts hammering and muscles taut, calculated every small movement, knowing that their survival depended on remaining calm, maintaining the barricade, and avoiding drawing attention, all while the bear's growls resonated like rolling thunder through the fog. The standoff reached a turning point when a delivery truck, returning to finish unloading, pulled onto the lot, its horn blaring, an engine roaring, and a sudden, overwhelming cacophony. The bear froze, its ears flicking and nostrils flaring as it processed the sudden sensory overload. For several tense seconds it scanned the lot, massive paws scraping the asphalt, muscles coiled, before finally deciding that the threat was too great to continue its intrusion. With a series of heavy, deliberate steps, it retreated toward the forest, lumbering over snow-dusted asphalt and across puddles reflecting the dim streetlights, leaving behind the chaos of shattered crates, overturned fuel pumps, and splintered signage as a testament to its immense strength. In the aftermath, Dmitri and Sergei emerged from their barricade, shaking and exhausted, surveying the scene that had transformed their normally quiet station into a tableau of destruction. Inventory lay strewn across the floor, cans dented and rolling, the strong smell of food mingled with diesel and fear, and deep claw marks etched the asphalt, windows, and walls. Officials later examined the site, emphasizing that bears in Ussuri Krai increasingly exploit human infrastructure when natural food sources become scarce, particularly during the late fall, when salmon runs diminish and forest berries are no longer abundant. While such incidents were rare, they highlighted the increasing risk humans face as settlements, businesses, and infrastructure intersect with habitats of apex predators. Dmitri and Sergei reflected on the events with a mix of disbelief and relief, recalling the sensation of the bear smashing through doors, swiping at anything in its path, and the guttural growls that seemed to vibrate through the building itself. Each second of those 10 minutes had felt like an eternity, a test of nerves, instinct, and the thin margin between survival and catastrophe. The experience became a cautionary tale throughout the region, illustrating that even in seemingly secure environments, humans could not underestimate the determination, strength, and intelligence of predators forced to adapt to the encroachment of civilization. By the end of October 9, 2025, the gas station remained closed for cleanup, with its windows boarded, fuel pumps assessed for structural damage, and inventory replaced. Meanwhile, the surrounding forest resumed its quiet dominance, the massive Grizzly retreating into its domain with no apparent awareness of the chaos it had caused. The encounter served as a stark reminder that in remote regions where humans and apex predators coexist, vigilance, caution, and respect for instincts are not optional but essential for survival. Even temporary food sources left unattended for only minutes could draw the most powerful animals from miles away, turning ordinary nights into near disasters and leaving humans to reckon with the raw, untamed force of nature.